We've all heard the phrase, too good to be true. Usually, it's a warning, but every once in a while, it's the beginning of something no one saw coming. Following the death of their grandfather, the Dinley family gathered at his old property outside Dallas to mourn and settle his affairs. While clearing out the living room, they dragged back a massive rug that hadn't been moved in decades. The floor underneath was discolored, warped, and cut into it was a seam, a trapdoor. It was swollen shut, nailed from the top, hidden with intention. None of them knew it existed. As they pried the boards open and stared into the darkness below, one of the grandchildren said something no one in the room would ever forget. Did any of us actually know him? To understand what was waiting in that basement, you first have to understand John Dinley. John was a quiet man, a farmer. He went to church on Sundays, fixed his own fences, and never once asked anyone for money. But toward the end of his life, he started telling stories. Wild stories. Stories that didn't match the man sitting in the armchair. He claimed his mother once saved a young girl from drowning and was personally invited to dinner by President Herbert Hoover. He said he once shook hands with a man who owned more cars than a dealership. He told his grandchildren he'd been trusted with a fortune before he turned 30, and that somewhere out there, a barn still held machines worth more than the whole town. The family would smile, nod, and exchange glances across the room. They assumed these were the ramblings of an old man filling a simple life with borrowed color. They were wrong about every word. Now, what they found in that basement traces directly back to a single afternoon in 1952. And if John hadn't pulled over that day, none of this would exist. He was 22, broke, driving a rusted-out truck toward Dallas looking for any work he could find. On a lonely stretch of highway, he spotted a car on the shoulder with its hood up. But this wasn't just any car. It was a brand new Jaguar XK120, gleaming British racing green, completely out of place on a dusty Texas back road. The driver was a wealthy man in a linen suit who clearly had no idea what he was looking at under the hood. John pulled over, diagnosed the problem in minutes, and fixed it with the basic tools rattling around in his truck bed. The stranger watched him work in silence. Then he made an offer. "Come work for me." John followed the Jaguar to a white-columned estate that caught the late afternoon sun like something out of a film. The man was a collector, not of paintings or coins of automobiles. In a climate-controlled barn behind the property sat some of the rarest vehicles in the country. Pre-war Duesenbergs, a 1937 Cord, a Mercedes-Benz 540K with ivory leather. John was hired as the private mechanic. For years, he lived in a small farmhouse on the property, maintaining a fleet most museums would envy. He later called it the best chapter of his life. But as John used to say, good times don't knock twice. The collector died suddenly, a horse-riding accident on the property. He had no wife, no children. When the will was read, the estate and money passed to the man's estranged brother. But the contents of the barn, every single vehicle, were left to John. John told his family he was so gutted by the loss of his friend that he locked the barn doors and never went back in. And the family assumed that meant the cars had rotted, rusted into nothing, been lost when John moved away to start his own life. They thought the story ended as a tragedy, a what if, a fortune swallowed by grief and time. They couldn't have been more wrong. Back in the present, the family descended the stairs single file. The air was stale, heavy, untouched for what felt like decades. Flashlight beams swept across shelves, old tools, and then something none of them were prepared for. On a reinforced steel table in the center of the room sat rows of heavy metal bars, each one wrapped in cloth. Gold, 27 bars. Each one roughly the size of a brick and almost impossible to lift with one hand. John hadn't let the cars rot. He couldn't bear to look at them. That part was true. But John Dinley was not a sentimental man when it came to money. Over the course of several years in the 1960s, he had quietly sold the collection, piece by piece, through private dealers. But he didn't trust banks, and he didn't want to change how his family saw him. So he converted the entire collection into gold, carried it down those stairs himself, sealed the door, and never told a soul. Beside the gold, they found a leather-bound ledger. John's handwriting filled every page, steady, careful, the same hand that had signed their birthday cards for 40 years. Dates, dealers, weights. Every transaction recorded with the discipline of a man who knew exactly what he was leaving behind. They called an independent appraiser. When the final valuation came back, the room went still. 27 bars of 999 fine gold. Total estimated value, just over $26 million. One of the grandchildren sat down on the bottom stair and just stared at the ceiling. Another started laughing, not because it was funny, but because they didn't know what else to do. John Dinley, the man of tall tales, had been telling the truth his entire life. He hadn't just left them stories. He'd left them a legacy buried 10 feet beneath the house. They grew up visiting every Sunday, and maybe that's the real lesson John left behind. Listen to your elders, not out of politeness, but because sometimes the person you think you know the best is the one still keeping the biggest secret. John kept his for over 50 years. Somewhere out there, someone else's grandfather might be doing the exact same thing. If you want to hear more stories hidden in plain sight, subscribe. We find them so you don't miss them.